FA, and I left the service as a sergeant. I was in the 45th Infantry Division, which was a National Guard unit that had been converted to duty. I was in the 180th Infantry Regiment, Company A, and then I had some later time in the 180th Regimental Headquarters. We replaced the 1st Cavalry Division, which is, has some famous stories about having fought in Korea. They were at the Yalu River and they got really beat up and they had to be replaced. So we replaced them on the line in Korea. If you're familiar with the history of it, there was a truce after the initial fighting when MacArthur went up to the Yalu River and then had to come back down. We finally had a truce. Now, the truce was a funny one because it was strange in a way, because they're very rare. It was a truce of not advancing or anywhere in territory. You could still shoot the enemy, but you couldn't cross this invisible line, which was the 38th parallel. In Korea, where we were in Korea, not in South Korea, we're on the border of North Korea. They're the most beautiful mountains you'd ever want to see. But it's not very good for drawing a straight line because they had nothing but hills and valleys and whatever all the way across from east to west. So we sat on top of the hill and we looked across a valley that was at one time in the beginning of the war probably was a rice paddy, and on the other side, maybe 1,000 yards, if you can envision 1,000 yards, were the enemy. And my introduction at that time as a private was a foxhole. Now, the foxhole is dug in the ground, and it comes up to generally about, if you dug it and really did a job, you would go this deep to about the beginning of your chest, so that your head could pop up and see over the corners. The infantry division, the 1st Division guys, had dug the foxholes before us, so we were spared the job of digging a foxhole. And they were 2-man foxholes. The fellow that I shared the foxhole with, I had been with since we had been inducted into the Army. As a matter of fact, he came from a neighboring town in Long Island, New York is where we came from. And Joe and I were pretty friendly. And the reason for the two of us was one of us always had to be on guard. Somebody couldn't go to sleep. One had to be awake, even though there were neighbors of ours here and foxholes all the way along the line. The first night on line, I have to tell a funny story. Now, maybe it isn't so funny, but it's different anyway. The first night on line, we knew I was 23 years old. Most of the men in my unit were either that age or 17 or 18 years old. Many of them had never been outside of their home in New York City or in Connecticut or in Oklahoma particularly. Oklahoma people didn't know anything. They were just from the farmlands or small towns. And there we were in this middle of nowhere. We had no idea what war was all about. I kind of figured once you got into a war, you'd be shooting all the time. But nothing happened. We were there. We did this at night. The next morning we woke up. We went to breakfast. We went to breakfast in shifts. We went down the back of the hill and they brought up hot breakfast to us. We went back up and we sat all day and we looked out at the opposite side. Nobody shot a cannon. Nobody shot a gun. I didn't even hear a gun go off. And so until that evening, then all of a sudden at about 8 or 9 o'clock, the whole line, everybody on the line, 120 men, opened fire. And finally a whistle blew and an officer said, "Stop, stop, stop." The next morning we woke up, it was a deer. Had passed in the valley and had hit what they call a tripwire. We had tripwires all there, so if somebody snuck close, it would send up a flare. A deer. So we were taught to shoot. We shot. So that wasn't. We didn't get any medals for that. The war in general, if you want to know really this war, I know every war isn't the same, but there are, even Iraq and Afghanistan, there are moments in the war when you are completely bored to death. We read more pocketbooks than you could shake a stick at. And we wore them, we passed them on, and they got so worn out, the pages fell off before they had to be thrown away. Had nothing to do. This was a major problem with the Army because morale declined when men didn't have anything to do. So they tried to keep us busy and active. They would take us off the line and replace us, and then we'd have showers and we'd have rest periods and we'd have more training, and then we were back on the line again. Every once in a while there was a battle. And one battle took place in a place called, we were in a place called the Chorwan Valley, Chorwon, in the middle by the 38th parallel. And there was a pile of dirt, which I called a pile of dirt, and maybe the rest of us did too. The Army named all hills by the number. The GIs attached their own name to the hill. They had Heartbreak Ridge, and this hill happened to be called Old Baldy. Now, Old Baldy sat, if this were the front line where we had our foxholes, Old Baldy was out there in the middle of the valley, all by itself. And it had once been treed, but in subsequent times, the enemy and our own artillery had knocked down all the trees. So we simply called it Old Baldy. We referred to it as a pile of dirt. The Army felt it was valuable because if whoever occupied it had an opportunity to see into the backyard of where our lines were. So it was a good observation point, but it was not part of the ring of hills that we were in. So they decided one day that they would take us out on, or go on patrol. I had done something for the Army, which I guess wasn't a volunteer. It was, I guess I learned it. I taught map reading to all of these people, and this is a little sample of a map if you'd like to see that. This is a big map, of the area we were in. But what I did was mapped out when I had opportunities from the dull times. I mapped out where Old Baldy was, and so they sent the patrol out, and I was on the patrol because I knew the way, or at least I had the map to get there. So we went to Old Baldy and poked around, and we found nobody on the hill. Chinese weren't there. So I came back and we gave the report. So 2 days later we sent out several squads of men to take over the hill. As soon as they got on the hill, the Chinese opened up all sorts of fire. I mean, and we had never experienced this. Noise and artillery fire that you couldn't believe occurred. Mortar fire. We had no foxholes at that time. We were pretty just laying on our tummies. I lost a very good friend that had been inducted into service with us, and he was the first one in our company to be killed, and then we lost several others who were wounded in this action. And we came back, decided that it was too hot, that it was best to get out of there. So we came back and to our foxholes again and sort of mourned the loss of our buddy. But that was what basically in the area that I was in was what took place, is that we went out on these patrols and you would stay for a day or two, and sometimes we took Old Baldy and a subsequent group of men, about half of our company occupied it, and we occupied it for about 2 weeks, and then the Chinese came along, and sometimes somebody says, hey, it isn't worth staying around, so we got off. Toward the end of the war, after I had left Korea, I had some buddies over there that were still there, and were there until 1953 when the shooting stopped. The United States Army had occupied Old Baldy 17 times for a piece of dirt. And that really was what the substance of it was, a piece of dirt. And we had lost several hundred men in that whole experience over that period of time.